I know that bills of lading might not be the best way to kick off your Monday morning or Monday afternoon, but we are very appreciative of you coming in today. Bills of lading are an interesting topic, and it took us a long time. This is episode 15 of our Future of Freight series, and it took us a long time to get here. Right? We've stayed away from things like documentation for quite some time. We've touched on RPA and some other technology that are kind of in the same general space. But for now, we've stayed away from these very, very thorny and kind of big picture issues. And I've been trying to think about the best way to introduce it as a topic. I know that bills of lading are something that every single person looks at whenever they approach shipping and they say, this is so backwards, this needs to change. I figured who better to actually have on talking about bills of lading than Andre Simha, who is the Global Chief Digital and Information Officer at MSC, and also very intimately familiar with this through his work at DCSA. So Andre, welcome to Future of Freight, and thank you so much for joining us.
Ethan, thank you. Thanks a lot for having me. I hope it's not too difficult after lunch to listen to us for a few minutes.
No. Actually, and I'm not worried about that at all. You know, I know that sometimes the harder things or the more important things take longer to change. And I'm really happy that you could take the time today to join us. Obviously MSC needs zero introduction to this crew operating over 570 vessels, over 100,000 employees around the world. And Andre, you've played a key role in the company's digital transformation and innovation for some time now, right? How long have you been with MSC for?
Well, I'm actually part of the furniture. And we've changed the furniture a couple of times. I've been with MSC for about 34 years.
Amazing. So, I mean, a front row seat and transformation and innovation within the organization must have gone through some pretty substantial changes over the past couple of years, I imagine.
Absolutely. In a relatively slow industry, I mean, fast moving, but slow on the digital. But yes, we're all catching up. And I think this is exciting times.
Yeah, I totally agree. And maybe before we continue with the actual questions, can you say a word about your role on DCSA and kind of, I guess as somebody both on the carrier side but also in DCSA, how that works and why were you so attracted to the organization?
Yeah, sure. Well, this happened about nearly 3 years ago when we first got together with one of the other major carriers and. They said to me, what do you think? It's maybe about time we try to define some standards for the industry. And I said, look, we've been battling with this for years. So of course we're in. We contacted a couple of other carriers. And I think, 2 years ago, actually in April, we finally managed to create DCSA with all the regulatory things being put in place. And the idea was really to bring the carriers together through the CIOs, so more through a technical eye than obviously not a commercial eye, and to say, what are the things that we could fix and we could help the industry to adopt in terms of standards that would really help everybody, both from the carrier side, but of course from the customer and all the third parties that we all deal with. And we did that, and a couple of, probably 6 months later, a couple of more carriers joined, and we are now 9 carriers involved, and they asked me to be the chairman, and I accepted because I'm passionate about this, and that's where we are.
Awesome, and I think it's really interesting, maybe this is something we can touch on a little bit later on, about kind of whether it needs to be carriers that are driving this change, or who exactly should be pushing the change, who should be requesting it, who should be the people that are dragging it forward or pushing it forward, and we'll definitely get into that. So first, just a word about Freightos in general and why this is something we care about. Obviously, this is something I care about personally over the past 7, 8 years or so, being involved on the freight technology side. I've been very curious about this, but in general, Freightos runs Web Cargo, which connects carriers and forwarders, and also Freightos.com, which connects forwarders and importers. And a very thorny issue that we always come across is documentation, so important to global freight, so difficult to digitize, not just from a technology perspective, but from a cultural perspective as well. And I'm sure that's something that we'll touch on as well. So right before we jump in, one last final word for all the participants or attendees. This is a lot more fun. Andre and I could probably talk about this for a couple of hours. This is a lot more fun when we can talk about it with you. And, we can't all be in the same room talking right now, but at the very least, everyone here has a stage. So if you have a particular question that comes up during the course of the conversation, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A section. And if I like it, we'll answer it. But let's jump right in. This graphic, this very sophisticated graphic that I wanted to start off with, is that bills of lading, to some extent, have become the punching bag of, I think, just about everybody. So some good data from DCSA about the actual costs involved around bills of lading and the toll that it exacts. But more so, if you listen to even technology podcasts about people talking about freight, they'll always start by talking about how antiquated freight is, how faxes and emails. To be honest, I don't think I've seen a fax recently. So I think as an industry, we're doing a much better job. But bills of lading is something that always comes up. And before we talk about solving it, Andre, you're trying to solve this, which means there's a real problem here. Can you articulate what the real fundamental issues are with bills of lading today?
Sure, Ethan. Well, as one of my colleagues said to me the other day, and I found that quite amusing, she said, today it's more like the bill of looping. And I said, why looping? And then I thought about it. And, I think we'd all be amazed to, figure out how many kilometers or miles these documents travel around the world. And, the number of stakeholders that manipulate them, going from the hands of the carriers to shippers, through banks, insurance companies, customs authorities, and other regulators. So, if you put this at the scale of the shipping industry, not only the container shipping industry, it's really mind blowing. There's, I believe, there's roughly 11 billion tons of cargo moving around the world from one continent to the other annually, and moving this huge amount of cargo requires a lot of documentation and paperwork. And of course, the bill of lading is still the most important document in this international trade situation. So, 2021, I remember talking to one of the initial digital bill of lading companies probably 25 years ago. And, in 2021, we're still doing paper. So I think if we look at the releasing, the printing, transmitting, signing, mailing, the cost is huge. And the manpower that we engage in these transactions are really ridiculous to a certain extent, where people could focus on something else. So plus, the traditional bill of lading, which is, a piece of paper, can be lost. It can be forged, and this happens. And then it means you need to print it again, send it again. And so it's really inefficient and unsustainable. If I look at, you might question me later on, but if I look at when the pandemic started in last year, about a year ago, paper was stuck, and the goods had arrived, and the paper wasn't there. So I think we really need this change, and we need to do it collectively. I think this is very, very important. And at MSC, this is my marketing minute. We've started to offer the MSC bill of lading to some customers as an opportunity and a big step forward to simplify their processes and bring efficiency, speed, security, and sustainability. And I think that is really the way we need to go.
And I think there's something intuitively obvious about, of course, we need to step away from paper. We need to move towards digital. You listed a couple of different problems there. Just off the top of my head, you talked a little bit about efficiency, a little bit about the sustainability aspect of it, a little bit about the security aspect. What is the real driver for change? Like, is it, we've kind of adapted around using paper, and right now it works, right? There's still millions of shipments going underway very successfully with bills of lading not being the point of error. Why is this such an important issue? When you look at all the different problems or obstacles that ocean freight is facing, why is it about bills of lading specifically?
Well, the bill of lading is one of the key documents, if you wish, but you have to look at the bigger picture. You have a huge amount of certificates that are circulating apart from the bill of lading. You have a lot of documents which customs uses to well, of course, for the risk management and to clear cargo. So we had to start somewhere. And when we looked at the documentation processes, we said, well, the bill of lading is the place to start. And we knew this as a carrier, and many other carriers knew this as well. And I think we took the opportunity of DCSA to launch a project and to say, how can we, first of all, standardize the information we put there? That's not too difficult. And then how can we, help vendors build solutions that'll cover not only the bill of lading, but then, using these future platforms or ecosystems, we can probably put in any of the other documents, provided that, all the different parties that I mentioned play the game.
Mm-hmm. So this is, that's actually really interesting. So bills of lading, one of the reasons it was selected as something to start digitizing is that it's so ubiquitous. Everybody needs it, but this is just the beginning, right? That's perfect. So this is your Amazon book moment, and eventually we'll work our way out to everything else. Great. I'm seeing a question coming in from Christian over here about the motivation, for companies to actually change from EDI or API into DSA standards. Do you have any? Actually, Christian, I see the question. Let's get to that soon, because I think that before we actually get there, I want to touch on one other question. Sorry, jump the gun on that. And I think this is actually leading us into this right now, which is that good things don't happen overnight. I think I probably use this graph in 50% of the presentations that we do here in the future of freight, because it shows that one of the stickiest issues is much less about technology. You can have airway bills and have had them for 10 years now. It's been already over 2 years since IATA announced that EAWBs were the default, for the industry. But penetration still falters, right? We're still only at about 75% of industry penetration for AWBs. And that's an industry that is used to moving at a much faster pace when it comes to, the actual goods moving. So, from your perspective, Andre, why is it that digitization and standardization are the solution? And then touching on Christian's point, how do we deal with the actual adoption issues surrounding this?
Well, that's a complex question. Indeed, yeah, if you look at IATA, that started, I think, in the 50s, if I'm not wrong. It took them a while to get to the early stages of standards, and then it took them even longer to get to, e-tickets, for example. And I think at the time, I don't remember how long it took, because I was traveling all the time, and it probably took a couple of years to get from, paper tickets to e-tickets. So, but of course, in those days, I think the progression of digital and technology, I guess, was probably much slower. And maybe they had some older systems that couldn't handle some of the standards they created. So if you look around us, there's we're really interdependent on many third parties. For some part of the chain, and so you need to get all these parties to agree to use, whether it's the EBL or the standards. You need to actually show them that it makes sense. So, what we did in this particular case, we invested in a solution. We're offering the bill of lading as a pilot, and we're launching something in the next couple of weeks. And we did demos to our customers. We showed them, the advantages. We showed them also the cost savings they could make and the time saving they could make. And we try to do that with ports, with banks, for probably about 2 years now. And we did about 10,000 e-bills, and the number is growing with, I think, 150, 200 customers. So, the only way to make this work is to demonstrate to everybody that it makes a lot of sense, and that it's not a question of, complex technologies, but this can be achieved very, very easily. Now, from a tech standpoint, of course, there's a lot of solutions out there, and I think that's a good thing, because multiple solutions create, healthy competition, and that enhances creativity. So in the end, customers need to have a choice, and I'm fine with that. But what's important is that, whatever is developed has some form of interoperability with other solutions. And that way, people can really have a choice. And for that, you need standards. And I think the demonstrating to all these parties that it makes sense to use standards, not only standard solutions, but standards to govern the documents, for example, is something very important. So, I encourage anyone in the industry to learn more about standards and see how they can implement those and, make some savings, or at least improve the supply chain, get rid of some pain points and bottlenecks. And I think, once we achieve that, then we can really consider it a milestone in terms of adoption.
So to double click on one of the things that you mentioned, and kind of beginning with the IATA component of at least initially one of the roadblocks was technology, right? So standardization is just the way that you're communicating, but of course you need to have the internal tech stack to send out the signals or receive the signals. When you're building out MSC's technology stack now, or 5 years from now, how flexible does it actually need to be? Like, do you anticipate a lot more changes coming in for API interconnectivity with different organizations? Or are you building things more around hey, we need to create an API for e-bookings, for e-bills of lading, so let's do that. Like, how flexible are you building it? Because flexibility also comes at a cost where it ends up kind of being less of a focused solution. How do you navigate that?
Well, I think it's a very individual. I'll give you my response. I think there's a couple of things. First of all, building APIs, not something very simple initially. You need the right skills. It's not something that we do in this industry. So that's been a process. And I think that building an API for bookings, for example, or for shipping instructions, or for schedules, if you don't have a standard, then I'm not going to build an API, because that means that whatever we do is going to be useful maybe for some customers with MSC, but it's not going to be useful for the majority of customers. So I think that we can build, but we need to build on top of something which has been standardized. So, some of the same people that are doing APIs are also working with DCSA as SMEs. And I think that's where we really get we get everybody together and come up with something that makes sense. Technology is not really an issue, because, we've been doing, SOAP and web services for years. So APIs is just sort of the new name, if you wish. And I think that a lot of techies are very keen, to look at that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that for in so many cases, it's really much more about the people that need to use them than and that being a little bit of the difficulty when it comes to building the actual APIs. Before we move away from the importance of standardization, you mentioned some very, very key advantages, or important advantages for standardization. Do you believe that all external facing carrier communication eventually will become kind of rolled into specific standards? Like, for example, right now you're looking at documentation, but do you believe that one day booking will be one ubiquitous standard? Track and trace, of course, DSA has been moving forward very, very well, but all communication, do you anticipate that there will be one umbrella kind of standard for all external facing carrier interactions?
Well, that's what I hope, because I think it's the only way forward if we want to simplify things. I mean, of course we can continue as is, but on the other hand, you have, new platforms and ecosystems are popping up. I won't name them, but you know who they are, which is a good thing. But if you don't have a standard, and if you don't decide, to put everything into that, then you're still going to have to use, a solution A for this, solution B for that, solution C for that. So I think by creating the standards, and probably standard APIs, anybody can go and build a platform, or and that to me makes so much sense. I mean, I have two phones. I have an iPhone and a Samsung, and I love them both, but I can use any of them with the same SIM card. So that's what standards are about. Anybody can build a mobile phone today. And I think that is, where we should try to go to simplify things.
Mm-hmm. We're probably at this very pivotal moment when it comes to standards, though, because it's very similar, I guess, to the iPhone and to Android, where if you don't have standards early on, then the industry is going to move forward without it, right? And the carriers that want to do bookings online will create their own standards. And once that cat is out of the bag, it's very, very hard to roll it back. And that's where you get platform aggregators that build their own APIs, and you get a lot of lock-in. Do you feel that there's some areas where the carrier side might be more aligned around standardization and some areas where there's less alignment? Or do you feel like there's a lot of alignment, it's just hard to galvanize around one standard at this point in the game?
No, I think at least from the carrier perspective, I talk to customers, of course, I talk to ports, all sorts of third parties, and I think everybody agrees that we need a standard. The question is, which standard is going to become the standard, and the standard that's going to become the standard is the one that's adopted. So I think we have a role to play as a shipping line to promote those standards, because if we don't, then we are also the ones that are faced with having to connect to different solutions, providing the services that customers expect. But we must never forget that we're not going to get very good data quality if we continue to have to map everything. So, I've seen the evolution even within MSC. Look at, location codes, look at terminal codes, port codes, depot codes. There's so many different codes out there. If we don't agree which ones we're going to use, then we're going to keep on mapping. And, it's not always one-to-one. So right. I think we have to make that effort together. Otherwise, the result will not be what we expect.
I'm seeing a lot of different questions coming in, and some that I think we'll get to soon, but one from Riyadh, whether at DSA standards are open and freely accessible, or if they involve royalties.
No, go to dcsa.org. Everything is free of charge.
Wonderful. Amazing. So moving on to the next question, and this is something that a lot of people are asking about. This is a chart of Slack adoption at Freightos. So internally at Freightos, we use Slack to communicate. And I'm showing this chart because it's very hard to get everybody on board. Even within a relatively small startup, early days, you could see there's a couple of small bumps where people tried to get Slack and started to try to use Slack, and it just didn't take. And it took a long time until we finally hit that point of people who are actually paying and starting to use Slack internally. And obviously, there's this very, very difficult question. I think it keeps a lot of CIOs and business leaders in general open at night of, I can build it, but they might not come. And this is something, you talked a little bit about talking to customers and talking to people out in the industry. But when you walk away from, the early days of implementation of these standards, what are the lessons that you've learned both internally at the organization, but I think more importantly, between other organizations when it comes to adopting new technology?
Well, as I mentioned to you before, Ethan, I try to move a little bit away from technology because I don't want to be sort of bottlenecked by the fact that, the tech I have won't do what I want it to do. I think I need to move away a little bit and leave the technology in the hands of my colleagues that have more experience than I do, particularly today when it's going very fast. And I think, I don't like the expression, but digital transformation, as we tend to call it, it's not very easy, and there's no magic solution. And I wrote an article a couple of months ago on the transformation mistakes to avoid, and I think that pretty much lays it out in terms of what we need to do to get there. And at MSC, I think today we have a very clear vision and purpose. We want the collaborative approach. We want a people, customer-first mentality. And I think these are the ingredients to a successful, digital transformation journey. It's all about doing the right thing for the customers, but also for our employees. And now we're essentially, as I'm doing today, trying to go the extra mile to raise awareness and to push adoption. And I think that's really the key message is we need to push adoption and all together, because, if we do it as MSC alone, nothing's going to happen. It's a tough question, but that's a short reply.
Mm-hmm. It's so difficult, in part because there's so many different people, right? This is the number that people always throw around, the number of how many humans are involved in each shipment. And there's so many potential points of failure for one shipment to go with an e-bill of lading, right? Just all you need is one party who says, I'm not playing ball. And if they have negotiation power in that transaction, then it falls apart for everybody. Have you encountered, this is kind of banking off of a question that I'm also seeing coming in from Carlos, have you encountered roadblocks in regards to local regulations for rolling out bills of lading?
Oh yes, a lot of roadblocks. I think there's still a lot of, local customs, for example, that require paper documents. But I think they probably need more pressure from their customers. It's not always easy when it's a government entity, but yes, there are roadblocks. But there's also countries that are being very, very vocal. I don't know if you saw the webinar from Singapore MPA last week, but they've been very vocal in saying, we want electronic bills of lading. But of course, it requires an organization. It requires, I think, vision and probably a bit of, flexible tech, which is not always easy to do. For us, it's the same thing. So,
to a certain extent, probably the best drivers, rather than, I see carriers in this case as an enabler. This can't happen if you don't provide the technology for it. But really, the demand needs to come from the people that are paying the bills, right? So, we really need to get the BCOs on board with us en masse, and they're the primary beneficiaries of it, in that they'll get their releases faster, fewer inaccuracies, everything will just work faster for them. Do you feel like, from a carrier perspective, your biggest battle or the biggest evangelism kind of target that you need to focus on is on the forwarder side or the regulatory side or the BCOs? Is there a particular area that you feel like is more important?
Well, I think it's both. And, BCOs, yes, of course, freight forwarders as well. I think they both these categories have an interest. It depends on, how they're shipping the goods and what kind of contracts they have with their customers. But definitely, I think, like I said, we need to do it together. Very often on the carrier side, I shouldn't say this, but very often we're pushed by the customer to provide something new, or to provide it in a different way. And we do that because we have that focus on the customer. So I think probably at an industry level, maybe there needs to be a bit more focus on carriers as a customer. But of course, banks, for example, some of them were very, very interested last year with the pandemic, and others said, well, no, we're going to develop our own solution because, there's a business model behind that. Mm-hmm. So I think that we can, if carriers and customers push, I'm sure we can slowly by demonstrating, not by putting pressure, unnecessary pressure, but demonstrating the value to everyone. And it's, well, for me, it's an easy sell, but again, mm-hmm. I'm not in that side of the business.
I'm seeing an interesting kind of tech question come up from Mieke, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, I'm sorry, but if all carriers adopt DCSA standards, and I think this is specifically around track and trace, what is your view on the value of container tracking platforms that are run by third parties? Do you feel like those will still exist or will kind of get, abstracted out? Like, how do you feel like this standardization will impact third-party platforms?
I think it'll impact them very positively because, if the platform is only doing track and trace, well, they need to, sit down and think about it and offer more than just track and trace. So I don't think a platform that does only that makes sense. Probably some of them, they offer insights by aggregating data from, weather and port congestions and things like that. But I think this is a very, very good driver for these platforms but they need to come up with something more than just, basic tracking and vessel movements. And that's probably where, they can use some different technology. They can build user interfaces that are really sexy and that allow customers that are working with multiple carriers to really have a view on all their shipments. For example, I think, TradeLens is an example. Of course, you do some of that in Freightos, which is great. But, people need to reinvent themselves the same way we're doing. I can tell you it hasn't been easy in our business to convince the organization. So I think, vendors that are developing solutions need to do the same. They need to think.
I think, yeah, and that reminds me of an answer when we were talking to the former chief digital officer at Maersk, and we were talking about this obvious conflict that's going on or potential conflict between carriers and forwarders. And he said that forwarders can do very, very well. In just some cases, they need to reassess where their value add is and double down on there. And I think that that's something that every single player in the industry, BCO, carrier, forwarder, it really doesn't matter where you are. There's more pressure than ever to deliver value. And now it's just a matter of finding out exactly where that is. So, moving on from the bills of lading, picture of a lot of containers here. And it's always, I think, an important reminder that at the end of the day, a big part of ocean freight is about moving 20-foot, 40-foot boxes. And those are fairly standardized, but everything around how they actually move and how the data moves is not necessarily standardized. And there's a lot of opportunities there. With that in mind, and the progress that you're seeing and the potential you're seeing for bills of lading, where do you see ocean freight moving over the next 10 years? Where is there a place for innovative technologies, and how do you see that playing out?
So let me get my crystal ball here. Well, this is a plastic. Look, the first thing I can tell you is that, in my 33 or 34 years in this industry, it's really the fastest progression that we've seen. In terms of digitalization. And I think the pandemic also put that a little more at the front of everybody's agenda, and people started to realize that due to the pandemic, things that were usually considered as normal, like sending bills of ladings around the world, couldn't happen. So what do you do? And so I think that has accelerated even more the digitalization because companies have realized at the top, have decided to increase budgets and put more focus onto that. And in the end, what is our priority? Well, our priority, I think, whether we're a carrier or a customer, is to make delivering goods simple, practical, and easy. And to do that, well, you need to digitize some of the processes. And you have to adapt also the business processes to the customer needs. Now, if you take a customer that's manufacturing devices, of any sort or whatever, they need to, compete with their competitors vis-a-vis their end users. So we can't just stay there and continue, sending documents around the world and not providing, good self-service solutions while they're trying to automate everything, of course, without forgetting the customer. So too much automation is no good. We want simpler solutions. We want simpler applications. We want more efficient, back office operation, more self-service tools. But we want to keep the contact with our customer. And I think that's something which is very important at MSC. It's always been part of our DNA, is that relationship with our customer. But if we can get that damn bill of lading from origin to destination in minutes instead of days, then how can that not be the way to go?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are very passionate about this. I'll be honest, I was kind of blown away by the number of questions that we got before this and the questions that we're getting right now. I think this is a topic that really resonates. And just to spend a little bit of time going over some of the questions we got before the webinar started, what do you feel like will be required to actually standardize global export documentation? Or is this what we've touched on already?
Well, I think, first of all, you need the standards that we mentioned, like, bookings, SIs, bills of ladings, things like that. Then you need, once you have the standard, companies can build solutions around that. And when I say companies, that includes, companies like SAP. They've been pretty much involved in what we're doing. And I'm not advertising for SAP. I'm giving an example. I think a vendor who's building a software solution, if they have a standard, well, it's easy. These are the fields. This is what my database table needs to look like. So what's so complicated? And I think you need that. You also need a bit of a vision. You need to understand that there is change management involved. But it's going to happen. The question is, how fast are we going to be able to get there? So I think there's a bit of a mindset change required to do that, and the standards which will help companies to build solutions.
Awesome. And in order to fuel that change, Obviously, pizza gets involved. So this is my question. But what is your favorite pizza topping? Always very interesting for me to hear.
Okay, that's a very, very good question. Let me look at my notes. I like spicy sausage, so I don't know if that's a good thing.
No one said spicy before. We get a lot of sausage, but no one said spicy before. So
I like spicy food, so there you go.
A non-standard answer, if I may, from somebody pushing a standardization. So where does MSC stand right now for e-bills of lading in terms of utilization and in general?
Well, a good question. As I said, we did about 10,000 EBLs as pilots, and in the next 2-3 weeks, we're going to be launching the MSC bill of lading solution, which will, of course, comply with DCSA standards, logically, and then we'll see what happens. I think that there's been a lot of interest for these solutions in general, but I also think some companies are thinking, well, which one do I pick? And so my answer is, well, you can pick this one, but we understand there has to eventually be interoperability with the other solutions. And I think, some of the vendors I talk to are very open to that because they see the potential.
Mm-hmm. I'm seeing a question coming right now from Alvarez about saying one of the reasons they're not using e-bills of lading is the high charge per bill of lading. Do you see that charges for that going down in the long run?
Well, we haven't announced our charge, so I'll be happy to chat with Alvarez later on once we announce. And of course, if he wants to tell us what he thinks is an appropriate price, I'd be happy to hear that.
And obviously, I think one thing going forward is that there's economies of scale involved here, and probably the more people that adopt this, the cheaper it ends up getting for everybody, and certainly you end up saving money on other areas as well. I guess I have to take a shot right now, but do you think blockchain solutions are the right solution for bills of lading?
Well, I think so. I think so simply because again, blockchain is not new as we know, but I think that when we looked at the tech and we said, oh, there's this blockchain thing popping up all over the place, that's really cool. The question was, either you think, what can I do with it? Or you think, well, here's my list of pain points. Here are the problems I have today. What problem can that resolve? And I think in this case, when you need to continue to have an original document in a digital form, I think the blockchain is a great solution because it, sort of guarantees the single version of the truth and that, it doesn't get tampered with. So yes, I do. I don't know VeChain, but I do agree with this question. Yes.
Great. And then I think time for maybe one more question. When do you think that the major carriers will make DSA compliant track and trace APIs available to the public?
Well, we announced last week that a couple of us are already compliant, and we're already offering APIs to anyone who wants them. And I believe that by the third quarter of 2021, most of the carriers in DCSA will make that available.
Awesome. All right, and then I guess just because that was a fast answer, my last personal question. Are you a business book guy? Do you have a favorite business book?
I do, and this is my advertising moment. This book, oh, you can't see it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Oh, you can't see anything. Okay.
The ghost book. Oh, there it is.
Maritime Informatics. Very complicated, very sophisticated, but, written by a friend, Michael Lind, and some other colleagues. And of course, I wrote a couple of lines in there. It's a very sophisticated book, a little bit academic, but it's the first time that there's a book published about the, maritime informatics. So voila, that's what I'm reading.
Awesome. And, I think there's kind of suddenly been this explosion. I don't know if explosion, but a small flame of books around freight and logistics digitization. And in general, I think it's just such a fun time to be in this industry at this particular point where suddenly it's all moving online and there's so many different people involved in it. So yeah, I'll have to get myself a copy of that. Well, Andre, thank you so much. This was really such an interesting conversation.
Pleasure.
I think that bills of lading seems like a topic that a lot of people try to steer clear of, but there's clearly a lot to unpack here.
It's gotta happen, Ethan.
Yeah. We'll pray. And of course, to our listeners and to all the people who asked questions, I'm so sorry we didn't get to all of them. A lot of fodder here to maybe do a part 2 at some point down the line. We'll check it on the Q3 progress and hold Andre to his word. Of course, Freightos and WebCargo create a whole bunch of different solutions related to platform interoperability. You can look up a little bit more about that on webcargo.co or freightos.com. And I look forward to seeing everybody on the next webinar. Thank you, and have a great day and a great week.